Let's get this started. Welcome back to We're Not Pros. I'm Joseph. Go ahead.
Wait. I'm Matt, and as you might be able to tell, we don't really practice our intros.
Not once. No.
Special guest, me, Mike.
Hey, and we're going to be talking about difficulty today, which is humorous because this episode was difficult to coordinate between three people.
I'm not endorsing that.
I'm actually surprised you did. Difficulty in games, and we're going to try to keep it to video games this time, but if we branch out, that's par for the course. It's been
Difficulty in university acceptance exams.
difficulty in finding work post-university.
Well, that's not really difficult. That's just unfair.
Your girlfriend in impossible mode. Or boyfriend, if you're so inclined.
Yeah, we don't judge here except each other.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first point that I wanted to touch on about the difficulty in games is that in video gaming's formative state, there was still money to be made, and those business decisions influence the difficulty of the games that you don't really see now, because now you can basically make any game you want and find an audience for it. But when gaming was first around, gaming was very popular in arcades, where, for those of you who don't know, and I'm actually loath to say that there are people who might not know what an arcade is, it was a center, probably in a mall or in a plaza somewhere, where it had a bunch of video games in single-use cabinets that you would pay money, either a quarter or a dollar or whatever, to play the game until you died, and then you'd put more money in, and you keep doing that over and over again. And these games were, by design, supposed to be difficult enough that you couldn't get through on your first try. You will most certainly die.
Milk the quarters.
Yeah.
Well, I would say there's two types of difficulty in terms of games. There is difficulty in terms of level design.
We haven't gotten there yet. We're still on my subject.
Oh.
The other thing too is that when arcade games started to transition a little bit into home consoles, the question was, how were we going to make sure that consumers got their money's worth? Because sure, you spend $50, $60 on the game on the first go, and maybe you had a good time, but it only lasted like an hour. And at that point, $60 was a lot of money. It's still kind of a lot of money now.
Yeah, you also have to keep in mind that the people who were making these arcade games are the ones that then went to go to work for Atari and Nintendo and all those people. So there was a transition time where they had to go from, no, wait, we're not trying to milk quarters out of people. You can't just insert more money for more lives. We have to actually balance it so 3 lives can get you through a level.
Yeah. And there is one game in particular called Contra for the NES that you pretty much couldn't do on the 3 lives that it gives you. There was the classic Konami cheat code that is still referenced today: up, up, down, down, left, right, BA start, and you get 30 lives from that. And even then, it was still pretty hard to get through the entire game on 30 lives because you still had to ration them out. But
at least it was conceivable.
Yeah, you had a chance, and this was necessary to design at the time because, like I'm saying, you can't, like, you need your players to feel like they got some mileage out of the game. If they beat the game way too quickly and there was no challenge left, then they would either have to make up a challenge for themselves, which you can't rely on your player to do necessarily, or they might not buy another game in your series because they got bored of it. They stopped playing it after a week. So games were super hard, and it would take you a while to get through.
We sort of underestimate how much memory games have now versus how much they used to have then.
Yeah.
Back then, there only was so much on the same cartridge. I mean, you don't realize, you actually break it down, but a single level of Sonic is actually usually just 3 objects repeated indefinitely. Okay, maybe 3 is a bit of an exaggeration, but that doesn't take up that much memory. And you'd think, well, why not shove more levels on there? There wasn't much memory. Mm-hmm. The modern computer is, like, even modern non-gamer computer is a supercomputer compared to what they used to go to the moon.
Yeah.
Technology has advanced that much, and now we can shove more onto there. Now we can have huge, expansive worlds with lots of stuff in it. But once upon a time, you had to make a world last.
Yeah. And this design principle has had an effect on the early generations of gamers because they grown accustomed to treating difficult games as a rite of passage. If you couldn't beat a game on the hardest difficulty, you weren't you wouldn't have thought yourself as good as a gamer as the ones who could beat it. There was achievements to beating games that were notorious: Battletoads, Mike Tyson's Punch Out, Prince of Persia. I mean, there's so many. I mean,
Yeah, another example is Ninja Gaiden.
Ninja Gaiden.
Even the new Ninja Gaiden, well, at least the first new Ninja Gaiden was pretty damn hard. The second one was also hard, and the third one kind of dumbed everything down. But it's a notoriously difficult series.
Yeah. The two first in the Zelda series on the NES are still some of the most difficult games you can play, and even those games have been dumbed down for audiences, because now that gaming is much more popular. In order to really make a profit off these much more expensive games to make, you need to make sure more people are playing it. So, Mike, what were you going to say about the two different kinds of difficulty?
Well, the two different types of difficulty in games, there's the level design, in terms of how hard the enemies are, and the AI. There's also narrative, whether your choices have an impact.
Okay. Now there's a story that Matt has told a couple of times on the show revolving having to make a difficult choice in The Witcher and actually being so conflicted that you just kind of walked away from it. Would you consider that to be narrative difficulty?
I don't really think so, because the choice, like, it's one of the things where the more I look back on it, the more I just realize this was getting pretty silly. Like, if it weren't for the computer crash and having to reinstall a bunch of things and just not getting around to reinstalling The Witcher, I probably would have just gotten back into that. I wouldn't really consider that narrative difficulty. That was the world that The Witcher takes place in. Is just a very dark world where there is no right and wrong. And if anything, I was possibly a little bit naive to try to find a neutral solution to a problem that just said one of these two factions are going to die and neither of them really deserve it. So I wouldn't really consider that to be narrative difficulty. That is something that, again, has only ever happened in this one game. I've never even heard of something similar to it happening in another game. I've heard of close things. Like, an example a lot of people use is in Mass Effect 2, where you're going to wipe out a bunch of rogue Geth who basically want to destroy the world and we're working for the bad guys. But then you discover that it might be possible to reprogram them instead of destroying them. So you could basically take away their faith in these creatures that want to eliminate the galaxy, but that means you're kind of taking away their free will. Now, for me, the choice came down to we need more allies in the fight against these people, and we're going to be killing them anyway. So this way they get to stay alive, and we're not telling them to believe something else. We're just telling them to stop believing in these one guys. So maybe they'll be allies later on, but ultimately it's preferable to killing. I didn't find that to be as difficult a choice, but I understand why other people had a lot of difficulty with that choice.
Okay. So, Mike, in that case, what I'd like to hear is some examples of what you would say is narrative difficulty.
Well, the only examples I can think of that are narrative difficulty, sort of, is the Telltale games. For example,
Okay.
in The Walking Dead Season 1, can I spoil one thing, or...?
You have been warned. Spoilers.
It's Season 1 at this point. It's like, there's only so many years before you just, either you're playing it or you're not.
Or it's in your to-do list. I have a to-do list of at least like 20 games. Still need to be Contact on the DS. I'm halfway through that. Anyways.
But anyways, so in one part near the end of episode 2, you're basically starving and you're dealing with cannibals in the forest. Now what happens is you encounter a vacant car and it's full of food. You could either have a choice of getting the food or not getting the food. The thing that's kind of difficult is that on one hand, yeah, you're surviving, but also you never know. There could be a family that is also having the food and they could be starving.
Right. And for this to be difficult, you really do need to put yourself in the position of those people. I think in that situation, you're not approaching it so much as a player as you are someone who is representing the character in the game and trying to understand how difficult it is for them to make the decision, as opposed to how difficult it is for you to make the decision, although it's still difficult. So I understand that. And I'm trying to think of an example myself where I had to face like a hard choice like that.
Well, really, choices like that didn't really, like, going back to the initial examples of difficulty, in older games, it was all about movement and doing stuff like that. We have seen in recent years the advent of the genre of the walking simulator, and we have seen these narrative exclusive games like Telltale, pretty much everything Telltale does. We've had Sam and Max, although I don't think you've ever had to make a moral decision in that. We have had The Walking Dead. We've been moved into Tales from the Borderlands, in which you can make decisions and they do affect things. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and say everything Telltale does, because no one has done it better than Telltale so far.
Well, I'd say about 99% of the only game I would say that doesn't really have a choice is I forgot what the puzzle game is called.
The Talos Principle?
No, not the Talos Principle. That's not by Telltale. It's called. I forgot.
There's The Wolf Among Us. There is Back to
No,
the Future.
it's National Tether's Puzzle Agent.
Okay, that one I haven't even heard of.
It's mostly like I'm not quite sure I would say narrative difficulty is really something that we've seen enough examples of to say it's a big thing, because this is still a bit of an immersion genre.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of story focused games, but up till now there's been a lot of sporadic control over it. Like The Witcher is a great example, but even that there is only a certain illusion, because the ending of The Witcher, no matter what choices you make, is always the same. It's just viewed from a different outcome. The event at the end of The Witcher never changes. It's just what side you've taken or what choice you made up to that point. There's only so much control you have over the plot, and we're getting to the point where you have more and more and more control over it. Undertale being an example of one you have a lot of control over the plot, which is probably why it's so short, because branching threads can only branch out so much before you've completely taken over someone's hard drive.
Also depending on your budget.
And it's hard, at least for me, to nail it down, because we don't really have a huge number of examples yet, and it does seem to me that it's still a gameplay related thing. You can still quantify every decision by what does it get you mathematically versus what does it get you thematically.
I will say on the subject, because I was thinking about if maybe the Stanley Parable can qualify for this, and it might actually branch out a little bit from what you're saying, but the Stanley Parable is a game that I haven't actually technically fully beaten yet, because there's still achievements that I haven't unlocked. And in that sense, the only way to unlock those achievements is to complete any other elements to the narrative, because that's the only thing that the gameplay really is about. It's about exploring the narrative of the Stanley Parable.
I'd like to point out that one of the achievements, you actually have to hack the game. There is no way to get it without hacking the game.
So when we think about narrative and we think about story, it's not something that is intrinsic to gaming. Story is prevalent across all mediums, but this is the one where the storyteller has a direct opportunity to challenge you as a player based off what's going on in the story. If you don't want to continue watching the story of, say, a television show or a movie, you can walk away. And in that case, the storyteller has, beaten you, challenged you too much to the point where you can't handle it anymore.
Failed to engage you?
Yeah.
Sometimes I think, if a story is very well told, but it's just a very difficult subject, very sensitive subject, like sitting through all of Schindler's List or Requiem for a Dream, you might get up and go, I'm gonna come back and do this later.
Another example of a show that's kind of difficult to get into, but it's also very good, is Oz.
Yeah, and there's usually some rewards to watching these difficult shows, because you're much more emotionally charged when you watch it. It's not the same thing as Sex and the City, where it's just, hey, everybody's having a good time and somehow they can hold down these professions in New York.
Or House, where every single episode is basically the same.
Yeah, well, that's formula. So when I get back to the Stanley Parable and the fact that there's still these achievements to unlock, I'm like, this is a game that's actually beating me by virtue of me not having fully explored the narrative, me actually being like, I haven't played the Stanley Parable for an entire Tuesday. I haven't done that yet. So there's something that is difficult for me to do, but it's almost like narrative difficulty on a literal sense. Like it's not even like a difficult choice for me to make. It's just like the story is the element that is beating me right now. So like you said, it's immersion, and I'm very curious to see as to where it's going to go from there.
Yeah. Also, getting back to an example of Undertale, the choices all boil down to this. So you have the become the friend of all monsters, neutral, and kill every single monster. Personally, I would say...
So when you say neutral, is it like a case-by-case basis where you
might
kill him, might spare that?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Personally, though, I wouldn't really do the genocide difficulty because, in my opinion, I like pretty much all of the characters in Undertale. So it's kind of like I don't know about killing them. It makes me feel bad.
But how is that difficulty versus choice? Because it's in Undertale you can choose to kill or spare anything, but that's mostly that's part of a choice. If I were to just use another example, in Deus Ex Human Revolution, you get experience for doing lots of things in the game. If it's in combat, you get 10 experience for killing anyone or for taking somebody down, but you get an additional 10 experience if you showed them mercy, if you took them down using a tranquilizer dart or by just knocking them out or something like that. So in that game, it's actually more difficult to kill people, as killing people is loud, tends to draw attention, and you get less experience for doing it. So ultimately, you're hurting your power creep. I may not use power creep correctly there, but you're hurting your power curve. So in that game, it's worth going through the extra challenge to spare people because the reward is additional experience. Now, from my experience in Undertale, yes, you do, get to have more health by killing things, but beyond that, since you can defeat people in very few turns through non-lethal methods, I want to understand how that is a difficulty setting versus just plain a moral choice. Because moral choices are kind of, I wouldn't really call them difficulty so much as a personal thing. Because I can play Bioshock, not give a fuck about the little sisters, and just slaughter them all for more power, and then whatever ending I get is whatever ending I get because I enjoyed the journey. I wouldn't really consider that to be a difficulty thing.
Well, the only thing I will say is that if you go to the genocide route, you basically have to deal with a lot harder bosses. For example, one boss. There's one boss where it's honestly the hardest boss in the game. What he basically does is when he first start, Undertale works. It's kind of like a mixture of a hybrid between bullet hell and RPG. So when he first starts, he attacks by shooting out blasters that affect most of the screen.
Just so we're talking about Sans, right?
Yeah, Sans. Okay. And not to get into it, but if you do the genocide ending, you fight Sans, which is the hardest in the game.
Really, because I found Flowey's ultimate form, which was the spare everyone ending, to be the hardest boss in the game. Mostly because, hey, you spared everyone, so you don't really have a lot of experience.
Well, what I'm getting as somebody who actually hasn't gone through Undertale yet is that the game is pretty much a consistent difficulty level, but making different choices allows you to see different parts of the story or face different opponents so that you get the more complete experience.
Well, technically speaking, if you want to know the entire lore of Undertale, you have to play through multiple times. Like, there's things you learn about the characters and such in the Genocide run, which you would never learn during the Pacifist run, and there are some things in between. So if you want to fill out the whole story of what happened to this universe, you have to play the game multiple times, and you have to do it in completely different ways every time.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to move on to back to core difficulty in gameplay. Now, I started playing a new game well, it's not a new game. It came out in 2012, but it's new for me. Kid Icarus on 3DS. I've been playing it for about 8 to 9 months now, and I am personally surprised by how much I took to it. I thought I was just going to borrow it from my friend, go through the story, be like, okay, I'm done. But the game is designed in a way where it goes through every level of difficulty a player can experience, and it hands out the difficulty to you at your discretion so that you don't have to make it harder if you don't want to. For those of you who probably maybe have played Smash Brothers, the latest one, when you play single player, there is a 1 to 9 slider that you can go all the way to the 9, and it's the hardest possible difficulty that you can play, and it took this from Kid Icarus. So what happens is that you can go through every of the 30 levels in the game, play it on standard, and you probably get through it just fine. But even with it as an experienced gamer as I am, I'm still on maybe chapter 12, and I can't get through a level on my first go level 9 ever. At least it takes me 5 tries some of them have been 15 to 20 tries. And what it does is that it still manages to find a way to like compensate you for your time, because you can still earn the resource in the game. You still might pick up weapons that you can fuse to make stronger weapons. So it's always worth going through. But if you die on a level 9 try, it will remove you and it will put you into the rank 8. So you have to get it right on your initial go. You cannot die. And I have to say, I think it makes Kid Icarus an exceptionally good product, even if the gameplay is only above average, because the controls take a long time to get used to. But I have to say, I really commend this idea, because it turns this single package into something that I can personally invest a lot of time into, because it's so goddamn hard. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because Kid Icarus's levels are procedurally designed. There is only one route. There's maybe like a sidetrack that you might take, but it's not an alternate path. It's just like, oh, here's an extra room you can go into and try to shoot some things. So you will always know where your enemies are. You will always know where they're going to shoot. You will always know what challenges you're going to be facing. And in order to complete the level, it actually comes down to 50% memorization and 50% skill execution, both of which you can mitigate by having a stronger weapon. But it's still goddamn really hard. And I have to say, as much as I'm enjoying trying to overcome these challenges, I'm not as rewarded personally by the idea of beating something because I memorized it, as opposed to beating something because I was like genuinely skillfully able to get through it on my first go. So for people who prefer that kind of style, there are games called roguelikes, where the whole thing is randomly generated and you can't memorize shit. You have to rely on your equipment to deal with a lot of the problems, but also your own personal understanding of the game mechanics and being able to personally overcome it.
Well, roguelikes, I think, also have a lot of their own problems. Like, I think my all-time favorite roguelike would be Faster Than Light. Absolutely amazing game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But one of the nice aspects of it is the default ship, which apparently I found out I've been pronouncing incorrectly this whole time, so I'm not even going to try because I don't remember the correct. It's a kind of bird. The default ship is actually really powerful, even though you haven't unlocked any other ships. It's got a burst laser, which in terms of energy to output ratio is the best weapon in the game. Like, the better weapons in the game require you to put more energy into it, but for 1 energy point, firing a burst of 2 lasers is the best in the game. And it's got a missile launcher. Missiles ignore all shields, but they cost a separate resource. You have to be careful when you use them. It's a decent size, so it's very unlikely that your opponent is going to damage a critical system as opposed to an empty room. And yeah, you can very easily beat the game with this ship. And so I do feel like that roguelike equipped you very well. I'm going to use an example of a bad one later. But the problem is FTL's mechanics can often feel to be very unfair. I was doing a run through as the Red Tail, which is another one of the ships. And even though I stopped at every single place I could on the way to the final area, I did not see a single store. None. I always thought there was one per sector, and admittedly I did not stop at every single planet, every sector, because limited fuel and you've got this armada chasing you, so you kind of have to keep moving. But I stopped at every single one I could, and I didn't even see a store, let alone, stop at one. And I reached the final area, and it's like, oh, you have to fight this final boss. And I'm looking at my ships, like, I've got ridiculously upgraded shields, ridiculously upgraded engines. I have a stealth system. I've got teleports in, like, all these amazing things. And then I didn't have a teleport system. I had no idea why I said that. But I still had my basic level 1 lasers. They weren't even burst, they were regular. So if all 4 of my lasers hit the final boss, his shields will be down, and my weapons will be recharging. So I just quit. Because it was physically, the game, through randomness, left me physically incapable of fighting the final boss. Now, I do know there was an update recently where they added the possibility for stores to have tabs. So it's way less likely that coming across a store won't give you something you need. But especially back when I originally played it, the dice rolled declared that I would never encounter a store, or at least not a store that sold weapons, and therefore I would come to the final boss completely unable to do anything to it. And I guess a counterexample I have to a badly designed roguelike in terms of difficulty would be Ziggurat. Ziggurat is a first-person shooter, and it's a very procedurally generated game because you can actually take a step back and say, I can see the code kind of thing. Like, you can tell this is a one-sized room. This is another sized room. This is a room with this kind of obstacle. You can literally see how they've just been slapped together in many ways.
Yeah.
But the first time I played it through, I actually got pretty far. And then after I died, it said, well, look at all the stuff you unlocked. You unlocked this weapon that you might find on one of the routes. You unlocked this perk, which you might find on one of the routes. You unlocked this one. And the next one I went in, I got the item, which I basically had unlocked from beating one of the bosses, and it was a magical homing rocket launcher. So now I could run around like a madman, firing the magical homing rocket launcher, only needing to vaguely get my reticule on people. And I'm thinking, like, this makes it so much, this is so fucking easy. And continuing to play that game, whenever I found this weapon on the first or second floor, the game was automatically easier, and that was not available on my first run. So, like, in fact, when I look back on everything I had available in the first run versus everything I have now, is that the game did not properly equip me to win. It expected me to die repetitively in order to unlock this stuff, and I'm not... That as a design just doesn't really feel fair to me because you're under-equipping me. You've taken, like, the default ship in FTL was a very capable ship. It is very strong, and many people think it's the best ship in the game, and I don't challenge that. My preference to the Taurus, but that's, I understand that's a preference and not a mathematical fact. Whereas in this game, Ziggurat, so many things were chained up behind walls, and even though I was unlocking them on the run, I could not benefit from those locks until I died.
Whoa. Another thing with roguelikes is that one thing that's a double-edged sword is randomness in terms of the loot you get and the enemies, which could be a good and a bad thing. The bad thing being is that, let's say you get to the first dungeon, you get like one really good weapon, which would make the game harder. One of the games that has that problem is Enter the Gungeon, which is basically, think of it like, I forgot what the...
Bullet hell?
Yeah, it's a bullet hell dungeon crawler, where you basically dodge, shoot. The only problem I have with the game is, especially in the first area, you get really good weapons, which, I don't know, it would make the game less rewarding that you get.
Because then why did you bother overcoming the harder challenges only to not be rewarded as effectively?
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on Diablo because the way Diablo approached difficulty was very intelligent. Is that when a player decides what they want to get out of the game, a player wants to beat a game, and when they don't succeed, it means the game beat them. And the way Diablo is set up is that once a player beats the game just gets harder and tries to beat you harder than you beat it. And so it turns into this boxing match between you and the game where you're trying to beat it on a harder level, it gets to an even harder level and tries to beat you again, and then you just beat it, and it beats you over and over and over again until you beat it so badly that there's nothing left. And at which point maybe you'll start a new character or something. But getting to that point takes so long that you end up getting your money's worth out of the product. But this is where difficulty turns into a bit of an addiction when overcoming said difficulty relies on luck of the drop and not necessarily player skill. Now, I think in all the examples that we've mentioned, Ziggurat, Enter the Gungeon, these are all games that you technically can beat skillfully. Technically. You can get through it, you'll be fine, but no one's expecting it. No one expects somebody to beat Dark Souls on their first run if they've never touched it before. No one expects that unless you're a god and you just know, like you can just react to everything perfectly. But,
well, technically speaking, dying is part of the plot of Dark Souls, so as long as you've gone and recovered the souls you lost when you last died, it's still technically your first run.
yeah.
But I know what you mean. I don't think even the best people have no death runs in those games. I've seen a lot of really good people in Dark Souls and Bloodborne end up dying and have to go back and recover all the things, which it's part of the mechanics of the game. And also, we touched on this I guess first of all, just to continue the Diablo example, one of the biggest issues with number 3 was not necessarily so much the marketplace, but that the game expected you were going to use the marketplace. Blizzard, offhandedly admitted that the game was made harder because it just presumed you were going to use the marketplace. So you would always have perfectly optimized gear at every single moment of the game because you could just use the marketplace. And it was very much scaled with that difficulty in mind instead of scaled the difficulty of this is the suboptimal wand, but you're using it anyways.
Yeah. Now, I tend to give the designers the benefit of the doubt because if I'm going to play this game, I'm not going to be some cynic who thinks developers don't know what they're doing. I mean, I'm not saying that's what you were saying, but I try to go in saying, okay, I'm going to trust that the designers had the right idea and the right execution. And my wizard would get to, I guess, nightmare or hell difficulty and would do okay up until like Act 2, and then I would come across a champion mob, and it would take me an hour to beat the mob because I was dealing so little damage and I had to so skillfully avoid their attacks in return that I was lucky to drop a single blizzard on them before I had to avoid their attacks and come back. It was perfectly doable, but it took so long. And the reward wasn't there because you only got so much experience for doing it. It didn't measure the possibility of you even winning the fight in the first place. So to what you're saying, it's correct. They expected you to come back with your resources that you've accumulated and have a better crack at what's going on. Diablo 2 didn't do that. Diablo 2 was designed in such a way that if you fought every mob on your way through the game, if you explored all the sub-dungeons, all the additional dungeons, all the side routes, if you made sure you did every quest, even the optional ones.
The leave the trail of blood approach to gaming.
Yeah. Or as my buddy Josh said very well, the authentic gameplay experience. You found that your grinding afterwards was optional and minimal. If you really wanted to grind for some good items, then you would do it. But you probably had some good drops along the way because of just the fact that you were playing the entire time. And it really surprises me and disappoints me when games turn into like rushes or you just trying to get through something. Like, I always found the combat in Diablo to be so enjoyable that I never wanted to do that. But now that I'm playing a game like Kid Icarus, my mind has changed. Because the first level on rank 9 is the easiest one for me to beat because I memorized it so well that I can go through it, farm the hearts, and then use those hearts to pay for the harder levels afterwards. So now that I did that, I understand that you do get to a point where you can beat the game so well, but there's still like 5 to 10% left for you to do, and that's the hardest percent, and that's the stuff that really keeps you coming back.
Well, that's another sort of general comment concerning difficulty and sort of the opposite of the roguelike scale, route memorization, where the only way to win is to fail, is to figure out where everything is. Like a great example, of course, is Battletoads, where in order to actually clear it, you almost need foreknowledge, not like even at parts, you just flat out need foreknowledge of what's about to happen in order to get further. And there's no amount of skill is going to get you past it. You just need to know that after this particular thing, you have to move to this part of the screen because that's just where you don't get hit. It's not an exploit, it's what they expect you to do because they expect you to have died several times on it so far.
Yeah.
Another horrid example would actually be the Fire Emblem series, which is notorious for ambushing people and instantly killing people. I have no problem with the permadeath in Fire Emblem. I have a problem when I'm carefully advancing, then all of a sudden someone bursts through a wall, one hits my sorcerer, and I'm basically standing there thinking, do I have to reload this game? I have to spend another 15 or so minutes trying to get to this exact same place again, betting that RNG will continue to favor me the way it has in my attacks and such so far, all just to know that someone's going to burst through this wall here, and who knows, 3 turns later, maybe someone's going to burst through another wall and kill a different character. Like, that's not really difficulty. That's, again, going back to route memorization, whereas I have no way to predict for this. If there was a crack on the wall, then maybe I know I shouldn't be there. Or
maybe it was like, you can see them, the group of them trying to break through the wall, and it says these guys are going to break through in 5 turns. So that way you at least have an idea of when to expect them.
Or maybe just having them break through and have them in an advantageous position instead of being able to immediately take a move and then attack. Another example, again, with Fire Emblem is in the GameCube version. In order to recruit one of the characters, you need to have one of your specific characters stand in a certain location by this turn. And I'm sort of thinking, there is no indication you're supposed to do this unless I read that particular issue in Nintendo Power. How was I supposed to know that, this is how you get this particular character? I have to have this lady standing here.
Yeah. And it comes down to 2 things. It comes down to how willing you are to experiment and also how much time you have to invest in the game. I think if you are in that position where you literally only have one game to play, and you know that you're not going to be having anything else to really do, then you're a little more okay with it because now you have more time to be like, all right, I'm going to go through this level a few times. I'm going to find the best strategy. I'm going to really nail it. But I don't really live in that world. I live in a world where I'm being distracted by so many different things.
And Steam sales.
And Steam sales. So does the game have a responsibility to cater to me? No, it doesn't. The game has a responsibility to do whatever the hell it wants. But if it's hard not to fault the game anyways, because it's like, come on, you just come out of nowhere. Is that fair to you? Would you like that? No.
Or again, just free movement, free attack, one hit kill.
Yeah.
It's like you can put them down to half health, and at least that would give me the ability to react and do something.
Yeah. I noticed that in all the games that I've played, the best way to execute difficulty is to challenge the player not to make mistakes. If you can play through a game perfectly, always know where to stand, where to shoot, where to aim, who to talk to, when to pet the dog, and you can get through the game and you know everything and you don't make any mistakes, then you have a perfect run. And then, depending on the game, you will accumulate gear or power-ups or something to help mitigate mistakes. And this is something as simple as giving Mario a mushroom so that he has 2 hits before he dies as opposed to 1, so that you can compensate for one of your mistakes. And in this case, it actually turns your survivability into an economy. One really interesting example is that, let's say you are in a level and you know you're going to be grabbing health in the next room. So you have your full health bar now, and you can do one of two things. You can be careful and preserve your health bar, or you can stand in an optimal position, gun down everything, take the damage, go into the next room, take the health, because you're going to have to take it anyways. So in that case, you had a optimal health of about 150 when your health bar is only 100 and the meta pack only restores 50. So there are times where actually making a mistake might benefit you, but this is a very specific and very rare thing. The overall point of this is that games and other, especially if you're playing against another player, they will punish you for making a mistake, and you have to live with that, because I mean, without making a mistake, then nobody loses. If you're at the World Cup and 2 teams are playing, one team is waiting for the other team to make a mistake, and boom, ball goes in net.
There's also another thing where there's some games that give you like all the tools, but you're limited to your resources. So for example, in Thief, you get a certain amount of cash and you have a store. So in each level, you think, oh, whether or not I choose, let's say, the water to shoot down any lights if there's a lot of lights, or gas arrows if there's a lot of enemies. Another thing with Thief is that it's a very tense game, since you can't really, the only way you can tell an enemy's around is by footsteps. So let's say an enemy is close by, you hear knocking, you get your surroundings. It also brings up, it also has another challenge where how do you become as silent as possible?
Another aspect sort of about difficulty in general would be mechanical difficulty. I was having a conversation this last weekend about somebody about Mass Effect 1 versus Mass Effect 2, and they really liked how Mass Effect 2 simplified a lot of the things and made it a little more, they felt the combat was more satisfying and it felt like it just reflected better on, I'm trying to remember exactly, like it was, again, more simplified and, well, not more simplified, that's bad grammar. Now, I play a lot of RPGs. In Mass Effect 1, they had a whole bunch of trees with all sorts of various effects. They'd have passive effects for putting points into it, and every couple of points you get an active effect, and then the active effect will get better as you continue to level up. And one of the things I did in the game is I put minimal points in sniping. This unlocked the skill Assassinate. When Assassinate is active, you lose all weapon sway, so your sniper rifle goes from this to dead on, and you do a metric ton more damage with the next shot. There's another tree called Fitness, which increased your health and increased the melee damage you did, but it also gave you the power to refresh. So what I did when looking at all this stuff is like, well, I know I'm not going to be using a sniper rifle all the time, so I took out just enough points to get Assassinate, and then I took a whole bunch of stuff in Fitness because I knew I was going to be running in there and trying to shotgun people all the time. So when a fight starts, I would take out the sniper rifle, activate Assassinate, shoot somebody, use the refresh power, activate Assassinate again, and shoot a different person, usually killing 2 people before the fight really started. That made me feel clever. I felt like I had really outthought the game. Like I had just weaved my own strategy into it and used its mechanics to essentially turn my character into a pretty powerful sniper without having to put a whole ton of points in the sniping tree. And then Mass Effect 2 comes out and it's like, well, you don't have any trees for guns anymore, but hey, you've got 1 tree for each of your 3 actives, and then another tree. Also, they're not really trees, they're linear bars, they just fill up, that's it. So I felt like it was a lot of hand-holding, it was a lot of taking things away, and a lot of people liked it because, again, it simplified it, but for me, those huge pages worth of stats weren't difficulty. I was used to that kind of stuff, so I looked at it and, this is pretty, like, I don't even have to break out a math textbook. I can tell you what all these things mean immediately. So for some people, that's harder. For some people, the game got easier. For me, it took away a lot of the RPG stuff and basically said, here's a shooter. Oh, and here's some things on short cooldowns.
Plus, another thing for the Mass Effect system is, especially with more complicated trees, is that you could choose any character you want to be. So if you want to be a hybrid between a fighter, I don't know if Mass Effect had any magic classes.
It had various what they called psionic abilities, which pretty much resulted in force push, force lift, and in number 2, you did actually get the ability to just dash forward through obstacles, which I found to be so fucking unreliable. Aha, I dashed through, but for some reason I didn't make it through that last thing or that last barrier, and now I'm out in the open, or I did make it through that last barrier. I don't want to be here! This is too far!
But anyways, the point is that with Mass Effect 1, you could have a choice of being whatever character you want. Gunner, fighter, whatever class. It's your choice.
You did have a lot of mix-ups. You could play as the more ability-focused classes, but still put a bunch of points in your guns so you can still shoot things competently, whereas in the second one, it did kind of say, this is your class, and you can't even use these other weapons. That was something that kind of annoyed me in that game, where I think everyone could use a pistol, but you couldn't necessarily use a shotgun. And at one point, you got the ability to either add a weapon class to your roster or upgrade the signature weapon of your class, which it was possibly, I think, it's just a different theme, but I did feel a core of that was people who just didn't want to deal with the actual numbers and complexity of Mass Effect 1. They found that to be too difficult versus, oh look, I can shoot someone and my gun doesn't overheat, I just pop in a new heat clip. That sounds great. Overheating was a big mechanic in the first one where if regulated properly, you could keep shooting forever and ever. But instead, in the second one, no, you just have heat clips. What are heat clips? They may as well be ammo.
Don't Make Cry Free has a bit of a restrictive system where each level you get a choice between which style you choose, whether it be Swordmaster or Gunslinger, which is basically you rely on your swords, you rely on guns, you rely on dodging, you rely on block.
Yeah, but those are playstyle choices. It's like what do you prefer? Do you want to shoot things or do you want to hit them with your sword?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, another thing to consider is your ranking, which combo to use.
Mm-hmm.
The thing with guns is that they barely do enough damage.
Well, it's a spectacle fighter style game. I mean, the guns are really just meant to keep your combo multiplier active while you then move into another position. It's actually some of a complaint I've had with some of those spectacle fighter games, and that's, yes, keeping your combo multiplier is nice, but beyond bragging rights, what does the combo multiplier do? I'd like to actually kill some things.
Yeah, but that actually ties into something that I wanted to make sure we touched on, which is when the player has their own personal goals as opposed to trying to meet the goals of the game. If a player wants to prove to themselves how good they are, then to them, they might challenge themselves and saying, all right, I'm going to do the gunslinger thing, and I'm going to get S rank. I'm assuming S rank is the best rank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's even possible because I never played the game, but that's the kind of thing that might encourage a player to impose a difficulty on themselves that's so hard that the game was like, I don't even know why you're doing that. That wasn't part of the plan. Don't do it, bro. And then you do it anyways, and like, good job, bro. And thankfully, we now live in a culture where we can support this kind of idea because you can record it, you can stream it, you can do
Achievements.
you can do it for charity, and now we get to live in a gaming culture that says if you want to like play through this thing and try to do S rank on gunslingers, we is going to pull up our seat and watch because that's impressive. And that is player imposed difficulty, which is something that I'm glad is a thing that people do, and it's a way of getting more out of your game when the game has run out of ideas. When the game's like, I can't give you any more challenges, you have to come up with something yourself, because it allows the player to treat their game, like it's their toy. Like it's like, I want to make this even harder on myself. A good example that I will use is a 3-heart run in any of the Zelda games, unless it's a 6-heart run in Skyward Sword, because you start with 6 in that one. And in that game, every time you beat a boss, you get another heart, which is just extending your life meter. And if you do a 3-heart run, you refuse to take them. You just walk around them, and you play the entire game on that difficulty. There are speed runs, which are some games even like are designed around speed runs where you just try to beat it as quickly as possible, whether you do it authentically or you try to glitch the game just to get the best possible time. There are don't use your main weapon unless you absolutely have to because it's part of the story. There are so many things that the players can decide to do to make the game harder on themselves than anything.
Something I remember from some of the earlier Halos, I haven't played some of the later ones, is they had things called skulls that could be activated. So in addition to the difficulty modes, you could activate skulls. One would say all the grunts get promotions. So now every grunt that shows up is a lieutenant, which means they're automatically more aggressive and they won't run away after you kill a few. That's actually something I thought was interesting. Like if you killed a bunch of grunts, the rest of them will turn around. It's like, run away! It's like, yeah, that makes sense, guys. You're trying to save yourselves. I totally sympathize. I'm going to stop shooting you because you're trying to... Oh, now you turn around and start shooting me again, you bastards. But these would give you sort of customization things you could do. Like, I think one of them even disabled crits, so headshots didn't really do anything, and they would just give you tiny tweaks, and most of them I also thought were fun. Like, one of them said, like, oh, if you kill someone with a headshot, you get streamers. Because reasons. And we have sort of hovered around this topic, but I think this is definitely something to talk about, and that is actual difficulty modes, hard mode, brutal difficulty, that kind of thing. Because a lot of games have that these days. It's, that's how most games customize their difficulty. It's, here's 4 options. Oh, I'm sorry, the 4th one is locked. Here's 3 options. And there is a bit of a gamer shame, I think, to playing easy mode, which I can sort of understand because it's called easy mode. I would personally just take everything on normal mode if I really want an easy mode run. But it's a matter of most games don't do it very well. If they go up to hard mode, all it really does is, oh, the enemies now have more health there. And in fact, Half-Life 2 actually admits this when you're saying difficulty level, say hard mode, guns are less effective. And then, your very hard modes, guns are really not effective. And you don't really feel like that's actually more of a... Like, that seems more masochistic than actually a challenge, because you've admitted all that's happening is you're nerfing my output of weaponry.
It's increasing the amount of times that you could make a mistake, because as opposed to popping out of cover and shooting him once, you have to pop out of cover and shoot him 6 times. That's 5 additional times that you can make a mistake.
Yeah. And if you look at a game like Dishonored, when you increase difficulty mode in Dishonored, enemies become more aware. So in normal mode, they have a certain sight radius, and they can't notice things out of the corner of their eyes, but whatever. If you go into hard mode, they'll actually widen it so they have really fantastic peripheral vision, and instead of just, what was that? Oh, it's just a rat. They'll actually, take out their sword and, try to get attention and try to do something. So the enemies don't become stronger, they just become more able to notice you and therefore more able to punish your mistakes. So I always found that to be more rewarding, and Crisis, I remembered that when you turn up the difficulty, enemies become, they do become more accurate, but at the highest difficulty setting, they turn off your HUD. So now you just need to remember that when you fire your weapon, it's going to hit the center of the screen. There's no reticule to tell you it's going to do that. You're just going to have a little bit of faith. And of course,
like how you would actually shoot a gun.
Yeah, well, you can eventually find laser sights and put them on your pistols and such, but it's that to me would I didn't even look at the other difficulty settings. I looked at the last one. It says turns off your universal translator so you can't understand what the enemies are saying, and turns off the HUD so you have to actually just remember the center of the screen is where the bullet goes. And Platinum has done a great job of difficulty in a lot of their games. In Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising, it doesn't really change values around a lot. It does to a certain extent, but it will change what enemies spawn. So you can step into the first level of Metal Gear Rising, and instead of just seeing 3 grunts, you've got 4 grunts, and a mini-mech, and a gorilla. I think that's what they were called. Yeah. They had these big units. I think they were called gorillas, or possibly alligators.
Well,
they had really weird names.
So for another type of difficulty, which is difficulty based on how good you are, the only example I can think of is God Hand. So how it works is that whenever, let's say you hit a bunch of enemies, when you get good into the game, there's a meter in the bottom right which tells you the level. When it gets up to the next level, the enemies become more aggressive. You become more vulnerable, and I think you have less power-up slots. So you can go up to level die, which is the hardest difficulty. Honestly, though, I don't think it's necessary since the game is already very challenging.
Well, the whole storyline in God Hand is you are the best fighter in the world before the game even started. So you don't really spend the game trying to become the best fighter in the world as much as you just spend it trying to prove what the game has already declared to be law. And one of the reasons I like that system is, again, because the better you are, the game says, like, oh, you're doing really well, rack up the difficulty. Oh, you're doing better, rack up the difficulty. And the fact that it has level die as the last one, it's kind of like the developers laughing at, we know exactly what we just did to you. And another thing I liked is that to decrease that, you can let yourself get hit, because if you start getting hit a bunch, you lose the meter.
Yeah.
And the other way to decrease it without losing health is to grovel. There is a button in God Hand where you start, sorry, I'm so sorry, just don't hurt me, don't hit me, don't hit me.
It's on the special abilities wheel, where it's just like it shows, oh, grovel.
Yeah, and that lowers the difficulty level because you're groveling to the, and I don't think there's any other penalty besides, just feeling your pride exit.
Yeah.
and the audience is going, ah.
There is, on the opposite end of that, in a lot of the new Super Mario games, as challenging as the levels are, the more times you fail, the more the game is like, do you want some help with this? Like in Mario Galaxy, like a sign or a TV screen pops up and says, you can watch and show and see how it's done. And if that still doesn't work, Rosalina appears as this ethereal galactic version of herself and offers to just like inhabit your body and play through the level for you. And then another Mario game, if you die a few times in a level, this little suit will pop up. Completely optional. You don't have to take it. But if you take it, it makes it very easy because you can just like float over any of the major challenges.
Oh my god, the chicken hat. You guys know what the chicken hat is? In Metal Gear Solid 5, if you...
Oh yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, would you like to?
Well, in Metal Gear Solid 5, I don't know much about it. I know there's a big controversy in game journalists where they just use the chicken hat.
Well, if you start doing really badly, getting caught on all that stuff, you get offered would you like to wear the chicken hat? And when you wear the chicken hat, enemies take longer to notice you for some reason, even though you're wearing the chicken hat. But the thing is, you're stuck with it. So the moment you put it on, it appears in every level, in every cutscene. You are there holding a dying person because you had to perform surgery, take a bomb out of your chest, and you're wearing a chicken hat. It doesn't go away. It is just this eternal mark of shame.
Well, another good example is Devil May Cry 3, which it starts off, you can only have the option of normal, hard, and Dante must die. In normal difficulty, well, what they did is that normal difficulty is basically Japanese hard.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if
there was like a translation error or something.
No, it wasn't translation error. It was because Devil May Cry 2 was so easy. Everyone complained, just like, okay, why
Yeah.
do we make it really hard?
It was easy.
The original Doom didn't so much as tell you the difficulty as it is ask you how you're feeling right now. So there was like, pussy, no, please don't hurt me. There was, all right, I can do this. Come get some. And then there was, I am death incarnate. So
Anyways, getting back to it, when you die 3 times and normally says, okay, now you want to play on easy.
yeah,
On easy, you can continue infinitely, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I also think Devil May Cry 3 gave you the option between how you wanted your lives to handle. There was gold, which meant that you resurrected on the spot, and then there was yellow, which meant you resurrected at the last checkpoint, if you die. Like, these were still your lives, but you got to pick which one of these two systems you wanted to work with.
Is that only in Special Edition or the original?
I think maybe that's only in Special Edition, but I liked that because it gave me the chance to still benefit from lives, but no, I don't just resurrect on the spot. I go back to the last checkpoint, I have to start the boss from the beginning again.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. I've said everything that I want to say, so if either of you want any closing points, by all means.
I guess the closing point is that you shouldn't make games like Hold Your Hand Completely, but you also shouldn't make them punishing for no reason. You should have been in the middle ground.
Yeah. Actually, okay, that does spark a closing point for me. Options, options, options.
Yeah.
Easy, normal, hard, brutal, impossible, everything. Just do it. Just do it all, and that will make your product the most desirable because it just appeals to as many people as it can.
I do remember, again, this is maybe just been the special edition, but going back to Devil May Cry 3, they had a difficulty mode called Heaven and Hell.
Oh, it's in the original.
So it's in the original. Well, this was a fun difficulty mode because everything died in one hit. All your enemies died in one hit, and you died in one hit. So it was a very interesting mode because you had to be really, really careful. Like, you could walk through and just fire Ebony and Ivory and everything, but the moment something breathed on you too hard, you were going to die.
It's especially infamous when you get to the level where
Leviathan.
Leviathan, and it's an acid.
Yeah,
As soon as
you
you
have to-
touch the acid, you're fucked.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that's always made games more difficult for me was a lack of information. You need to make sure your player is properly informed. And something like Diablo, this would be keywords on the characters. This guy can teleport, and he takes less magic damage. This allows me to adjust my strategy and proves in many ways that I am more skilled because of my abilities to adapt. But if you deprive information from the players or you somehow don't tell them, again, going back to the root memorization thing, if you force them to die again and again, they will feel like the experience is punishing because nothing they do is going to work. You're basically saying they have to die, they have to fail. And there is a whole concept with the Japanese samurai of strike down your opponent and learn. If you actually read the original All You Need Is Kill as opposed to the movie or the really stupid graphic novel and the really good one. There's a good graphic novel and there's a bad graphic novel, but
I'm going to read them both and try to decide which is which.
but part of the major concept of that is every time he went into battle, he would become better even though he just died at the end of it. And that worked for that, and as a policy, it can work, but it really is best that you don't have to hold their hands, but you have to make sure the player knows everything before they leave. They know how the game works before you take them out as tutorial, because if you discover an enemy who can teleport, but you have absolutely no ability to tell they can teleport until they appear behind you and put a dagger in your spine, that doesn't really feel like fairness. That feels more like the game is laughing at you. And I have seen some games that laugh at you. These are closing points. I shouldn't go into too many concepts. But, if you die and the game sort of makes a joke out of it or does something silly about it, if you're Quantum Conundrum and every time you die, it's, thing you'll never be able to experience number 37, eating nothing but cereal for days on Earth, like stuff like that. Like, that doesn't make me want to pick it up again. Not because you've beaten me, but because you clearly have no respect for me as a player.
So yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also, don't hire Q to do your voice acting. Q? John Clancy.
Are we talking about the next generation?
Yeah.
Oh, Q. Okay.
Because like his voice is just synonymous with condescension.
Yeah. It only works in the next generation.
All right, we're out.